Hello and welcome to another Facebook Live. It's really good to see you. If this is the first time you're watching, my name's Craig and I write material for a website called mansioningles.com where you can study English for free with lots of courses and material. And also we have a podcast at inglespodcast.com, which is a weekly podcast which will also help you to improve your English. And with me again, I'm delighted to say hello to Lynn. Hiya.
Hi, Craig. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
And well, I'll introduce myself. I'm Lynn. Put it like this on the banner there. That's the my business. You can see what I do at putitlikethis.com if you go onto my website. And basically, I'm an online English teacher, and I work with different people who want to achieve different objectives. So if you want to need English for business, or you want to prepare for exams, or maybe you're a teacher who is teaching in the medium of English and you want to have more confidence with your pronunciation or your methodology, then go to Put It Like This and get in touch with me. And I hope I can help you.
There you go. So thanks very much for joining us. People have started to come into the chat. What are we talking about this week, Lynn?
So this is a little bit similar to a show that we did a few months ago, actually, I realized, but it's also different. So the title of this show is There's No Place Like Home, because we want to talk today about all the different ways that you can actually have a home, different ways that you can live with one another. And a few months ago, if you want to catch up on the show, if you didn't catch it last year, we did a one like It's Good to Be at Home or something. There's a place called home. It was called A Place Called Home. And there we talked about the different types of houses where you live, all the vocabulary to do with houses and flats. But that was in the show last year. But this year we're looking at ways that you can live. And there's no place like home is an idiom. What does that mean, Craig? There's no place like home. Home is
the best place to be. It's the place where you feel safe, where you feel a lot of love, where you feel very comfortable. So maybe it's the best place to be, but maybe we'll talk about that later and see maybe if there are other options or other ways of looking at the idea of home. But before we get started, let's say hello to people who are joining us live as we speak. So Gemma is here. Hello again, Gemma. It's good to see you too.
Gemma.
Erica's here from Chile. Hello, Erica. Norma, hello. Montse.
Hello.
Greetings from Mexico, says Jorge. Hello, Jorge.
Hi, Jorge.
Christine, hello. Rafa. Good to see you again, Rafa. Felipe.
Minia as well. It's back again.
No, it's not. Minia. It's not Minia. It's Rafa.
It's not Minia. Oh, it's Rafa.
Rafa put his name. We had this
the
last
other way
week.
Round. Oh, sorry.
No. But Monica and I had the same thing. Rafa put his name at the end instead of the beginning. So
we keep calling him Minia. Sorry, sorry, Rafa.
It's Rafa the tour guide. Yeah.
Okay, great. Christine, Felipe, Liz from Mexico too.
Heidi
Vicente is from Valencia. That's where we are. Hi, Vicente.
Hi, Vicente.
And
Carlos from Argentina.
Great.
Hello to all of you who are joining us live.
Okay.
So let's start by looking at some vocabulary connected to places of living and home. And then we'll look at some verb tenses that you can use when you speak about where you live, and also the advantages and disadvantages of particular ways of living. And many thanks to Lynn's daughter who suggested the topic for this.
Yeah, yes, I forgot to say that. That was my daughter Carmen. She suggested this topic.
Thank you, Carmen. To fly the nest. Nest is nido in Spanish, if you speak Spanish, nido. So if you fly the nest, what does that mean, Lynn? If you fly the nest like a bird?
Then the bird, of course, the home of a bird is a nest. And when the birds fly the nest, it means they leave their home. They leave their parents. The nest is the home that you live in when you're a child and when you're growing up. And when you fly the nest, it means another way to say it is to leave home. All right. So you leave home. Obviously, you still have a home somewhere else. But when we say to leave home, the implication means that when you left, when you stopped living with your parents. Mm-hmm.
And have any of your children flown the nest? Be careful of fly because it's irregular. Fly, flew, flown. Have any of your daughters flown the nest?
Well, temporarily, yes. One of them has flown the nest this year because she's studying abroad for a year. Next year she's coming back, and then another one is flying the nest. So our nest, and then I have one that's still at home. So our nest is still occupied, but at some point they will all leave us and start their own lives and live elsewhere. And then we will have, my husband and I will have an empty nest. And
so you will be an
empty nester.
Nesters.
Which means that my husband and I will just be with each other again, and there'll be nobody, no children at home to live with us.
And you can do exactly what you want to do, and you can make your own decisions and live your own life again.
Yeah, that's true. Now, we also use the expression to still live at home, because sometimes people might ask my daughters, because my daughters are older, they're older than 18. So if you're an adult, somebody might say, do you still live at home? And that question, I mean, again, obviously, of course, you live in a home somewhere. But when they say, do you still live at home? That question means, do you still live with your parents? Do you still live at home, Craig?
No, I left home a long time ago, so I don't live at home anymore.
And how old were you when you left home?
Which time?
Mm-hmm.
Because
how
the thing
old
is,
were you? Did you go back?
Which time? Because I left home to travel, came back after a year, went to live with my parents again, lived at home for a while, traveled, came back. So I was going abroad and going back to the UK to live with my parents 2 or 3 times. So it took me a long time to start living on my own permanently.
To completely fly the nest.
Completely
you kept
fly the nest.
You're like one of those storks that go back to their old nest. I flew my nest. I flew my nest when I was 18.
And you didn't go back?
I never went back. No. So I flew my nest, much to my parents' what would I say? Much to my parents' disappointment, chagrin? I think, or chagrin. Much to my parents' disappointment. I think they would have liked me to have lived there longer, but I went away to study and I never went back.
So when I went away and started living abroad, I lived in a house with a friend. And if you live in a house with a friend, if you share a house or a flat with someone, that person is your flatmate. And if you share the room with that person is your roommate. And if you go to class with another student, the student is your classmate. So we can use that mate ending to make some compound nouns: classmate, flatmate, roommate. And
soulmate.
What's a soulmate?
Well, the soulmate is the person that you meet who is most who you fall in love with. It's the person who matches your soul, your partner.
Who completes you.
Who completes you. That's your soulmate.
I'll put that word in the chat. In Spanish, you might say media naranja, I think. You're half of orange.
Okay. Soulmate. That's right. And what's a landlord or a landlady, Craig?
Well, I can think of 2 meanings. There's one when you rent a flat, so you pay, or a house, you pay to live in a home, in a flat, or in a house. The person who rents the home to you is the landlord if it's a man, or the landlady if it's a woman. And you are the tenant because you are paying to live in the flat or house. Also, you can have a landlord and a landlady in a pub, and they are the people in charge of the pub, the people who run or manage the pub. You could say the landlord or the landlady.
Just before we go on, Craig,
yes.
There's a couple of interesting comments. Now, Jay has asked, When someone asks me, Jay, not ask to me, but when someone asks me, are you still living at home?
Or do you still live at home?
Or do you still live at home? Can I answer, no, well, I flew. No, I flew the nest last month. What do you think? Can you say that, Craig?
Yeah,
I'm not, I flew the nest.
I flew the nest last month, or last
which
year.
means that you moved out. You moved out last month, or you flew the nest last month. You can. But obviously, this expression has an idea of permanence about it. So the idea is it's not a temporary situation. It's for a bit longer, maybe a year, like you did when you traveled for a year and then you went back again, or my daughter who's away on studying for a year and comes back. That's kind of flying the nest, but you don't fly the nest for a weekend, for example.
No, it's more permanent.
Okay.
Christine says kindred spirits. As for soulmate.
Soulmate.
It's similar. A soulmate seems more romantic. Is it?
It is. I think so.
Like a couple.
A kindred spirit is just someone who thinks like you do, but your soulmate is somebody who makes you, as you said before, complete. Somebody who you feel is perfection. You know, it makes the two of you. And it's usually for two people, isn't it? Do you say you can have more than one soulmate? No, I don't think so.
Polyamorous.
Maybe.
But that's also Carmen's question. Alma Camilla, is it only related to a romantic relationship, or can it be a friend too?
I think it can be a friend as well.
Yeah.
I have some friends that I say, oh, they are my soulmates, and it's the idea that we think exactly the same. You know, we have the same interests, we have the same outlook on life, the same philosophy.
But you're very, very close. If you use
you're very close.
The word soulmate, you have a very, very close relationship with a person.
Yeah. Okay.
More expressions: to live from hand to mouth, and to be homeless. Do you want to take those, Lynn?
Yeah, I like the expression to live from hand to mouth. Now, if you live from hand to mouth, you haven't got a high standard of living. You haven't got a lot of money, basically. And so whenever you get any money coming in, immediately it is spent on food and maybe a shelter, right? So the idea is you live from hand, you put your hand out, somebody gives you money, and immediately you have to eat whatever they give you, or any money has to be transferred into something that will help you be able to survive. So to live from hand to mouth means that you haven't got any savings, and basically you're living very precariously. Precariously means dangerously, but not in the sense of security, just financial security. Is that okay?
I'll put some more expressions in the chat. To live from month to month. And
good.
To live from paycheck to paycheck, which is more of an American English expression. Have you ever been in a situation where you've lived from hand to mouth?
No,
paycheck
I haven't.
To paycheck?
I haven't. I've been very lucky. What about you?
Yeah, there was a time when I was really quite poor, and I literally lived from month to month. I got paid one month a very little amount of money, and I paid my rent, and I had very little left over until the next paycheck. But it was okay. I mean, I was very young, and the extra money I had, I spent on beer, so it didn't really matter because I was young and free.
I'm sorry, but I've had situations like that. That's not living from hand to mouth. If you can afford beer, that's not living hand to mouth.
Instead of food, like you had to choose between food and beer?
All right. If it was instead of, then it's hand to mouth. And then we have the other word, which is to be homeless. Now, when you are homeless, you have nowhere to live. So that implies that you're living on the street. You're living in the open air, and every night you have to find somewhere where you can sleep. Maybe you sleep under a bridge or in a doorway, or it's quite a dangerous situation, obviously, to be in if you are homeless.
And there's a question from Christine. What's the difference between a landlord and a lessor? A lessor is a person who leases or lets a property to another.
A lease, a leaser.
Lessor.
Have you just looked up lessor and it exists?
Yeah,
Does it? It's very
it does
rare.
exist, but I hadn't heard that word. That's why
Nor
I
had
needed
I.
to check it, Christine. So well done for knowing that. I'm just going to put that definition in the chat because it's not a common word.
No.
It's not used very often.
It comes from the verb. It comes from the verb to lease, which means to rent. The verb to lease is common. Yeah. So where you've put your definition, a person who leases or lets a property to another is definitely that's common. But I'm not familiar with the term lessor either. It's not a common word.
So yeah, I would much prefer the word landlord, Christine.
Landlord.
Graciela is asking to make ends meet. Nice expression. Yes, if you make ends meet, then you pay your bills. You pay the rent, you pay the gas, the electric, the water. You get to the end of the month with the money you have. So, if you can make ends meet, that's good because you're living within your means. Within your means. You're living within the money you're earning or the money you're getting. Nice expression, Graciela. Vicente asks me if I teach English. Yes, I do, Vicente. I teach for the British Council in Valencia, but only 1 or 2 lessons a week. And at the moment, they are reducing the amount of lessons for teachers because of the coronavirus situation. So I'm not teaching a lot in the academy at the moment, unfortunately. And Christine, in Spanish, estar de dos velas o vivir con un mano delante y otros detrás. That's new to me, Christine. Estar a dos velas. I haven't heard that expression before.
I suppose she means, is that from hand to mouth? Possibly.
Possibly. I'm not sure. But it's very literal if you think about it. You get money in your hand and you buy food and you put it in your mouth literally the same day or the same week or the same month. So you don't have any spare money. You're not saving. You're living from hand to mouth.
Hethy says hand to mouth could also be vivir al día.
Could be, perhaps. Yeah, maybe. I think your Spanish is better than our Spanish, so you would know, perhaps. I hope we've explained it clearly enough. So to live day by day or month to month. Another question from Felipe. Can you add at the end less to other places like office less,
houseless?
Not with those examples.
Well, he has said in brackets, I usually joke with that, or you used to joke with that. I think it would make a joke in English. I'm sure if you said, oh, I'm houseless, people would laugh. But it's not a common word. It's not what
sometimes it works, Felipe, sometimes homeless. It doesn't. You kind of have to learn it. If you don't have any money, you can say you're penniless. That works.
If you don't have any use, you are useless. If you don't have any hope, you are hopeless.
Yes.
So we do use the word less to mean without, as a suffix, without. But it's not a common collocation for houseless, but we do say homeless. Okay.
Something that's very relevant for me at the moment is downsizing. If you have a big house and you move house and you move to a smaller house or flat, then you are downsizing. You're moving to a smaller place. And that's exactly what my sister did this week. I was down at her place helping her move because she was living in a very big house. She's bought a much smaller house because now she's by herself. She's on her own. So she downsized to a smaller place.
That's very common in the UK. People in the UK change their houses according to their sizes. So often when you were a student, after you're a student with your first job, you might buy a 1-bedroom flat. A lot of people in the UK try to buy property. So they might try to buy a very small place, like a 1-bedroom flat, or even, 1-bedroom flat. And then maybe as they are earning more money, and if they get a partner, they have a slightly bigger 1-bedroom flat. And then they, as they become more wealthy, if they want to start a family, then they sell that and then they buy a small house. When they get more established, they might go to a bigger house. And then when the children, I hope you remember this, when they fly the nest, then the parents decide to downsize again. So they move from their big house and they move into a smaller house. But that's very cultural, I have found, Craig, because I know that, for example, in Germany, people, when they buy a house, they never want to leave it. They want to die in the house.
Really?
And I think, and I think that here in Spain, there's quite a lot of that as well, that people buy their flats, but there's not a lot of movement on the market. People don't, like in the UK, it's quite common for people maybe in their lifetimes to have owned 6 or 7 properties.
Yeah,
but I think here in Spain, that's not so common. And in Germany, it's not so common either. People buy when they buy a house, they never leave it until they have to, maybe.
That's true. And in Spain, they do tend to pass flats on to the children. So, for example, in our building here, some families have a couple of flats within the same family, and it just keeps being passed from generation to generation. That's very common.
Yeah, that's right.
Graciela says, in my country, we keep on downsizing. Where are you from, Graciela? I can't remember. Did you say Argentina? I can't remember.
I'm not sure.
Rafa says breathless. That's another less word. Well done. Another one I thought of is tasteless, without taste. So yeah, there are many.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, right. So now we're going to move on just to a tiny bit of grammar, because when you're talking about living, it's easy to get these things mixed up. Now, if you're living in a place and it's a temporary situation, maybe you're a student and you've moved to another city just to complete your studies at the university, and then later you're going to go back to your home city. Then when you describe where you're living now, you'd probably say present continuous. I'm living. So imagine I'm in Valencia, I go to Madrid to study, and then I say, oh, I'm living in Madrid because I'm studying. So you use present continuous if your living arrangement is not permanent. But if it's permanent, imagine you've bought a house or a flat and you're living there all the time, then we'd use the present simple and we'd say, I live. So that's an important thing to listen out for, because it shows you the difference about whether it's temporary or permanent. And it also shows you the difference of the attitude of the speaker. Now, I'm an expat, which means I've lived in many different countries in the world. And although I have been here in Valencia for 20 years, if somebody asks me, I say, oh, I'm living in Valencia.
And how many years have you been here?
20.
That's quite permanent, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's not completely, because I have an attitude that, I'm still going to travel. When my children fly the nest, then I'm going to travel again. So I like to say I'm living in Valencia. But if you go, for example, for a job interview, and if I wanted to apply for a job in Valencia, and then the person said to me, and where are you from? Where do you live? Then, of course, I'm not going to say I'm living in Valencia. Then I would say I live in Valencia, because I want to give the impression that you can count on me. I'm here. I'm going to be here all my life. Give me the job and I will work for you forever.
And very often, as Lynn just demonstrated, the question form is the present simple. Where do you live? The assumption, what you assume, is that the person has a permanent place to live. So if you ask somebody that question, usually use the present simple. Where do you live? A comment from Carmen. She says, moving in houses is one of the most, I would say, stressful. Use the adjective, stressful situations in life. Yes, Carmen, that's very, very true. But maybe that's why Spanish people don't like doing that. And my sister was very stressed last week because she had
it is
to
a
move.
stressful situation. Okay.
Okay, so the next tense for you, as Lynn also used just before, I've lived, which is present perfect, I'm sure you know. And you often use this when you speak about your life. And if you've studied the present perfect, if you've studied a little tense grammar, you may have heard that the present perfect is used when you're speaking about the past, but there's a connection to now. There's some kind of connection to now. And if you are still alive, which we are, then there's a connection to now because you're not dead. So when you're speaking about your life from the past until now, it's very common to use the present perfect, especially in situations like job interviews. Where have you lived in your life? Well, I've lived in Spain, I've lived in France, I've lived in the UK, I've worked here, I've studied this, I've done that, because you're talking about your life experience. So use the present perfect when you're talking about all of your life from the past until now. And with the verb to live, it doesn't really matter if you use simple or continuous. You can say, I've lived or I've been living. There's not that much difference with the verb to live.
No. And then the last one we have is the real past tense, which is I lived. Now, when we say I lived, it means it's definitely not true now. It's got no connection to the present. So if we use, Craig's written here in the banner, a time reference, if we say something like 5 years ago or when I was 18,
during the war.
During the war. No, I wasn't in the war.
I didn't say which war.
In the last century. So if you have a phrase which refers to time, that's a time reference phrase. And then it's very clear that time reference phrase has nothing to do with now. So then you don't use the present perfect. You use the past simple. So you say, I lived. So if, for example, I can say, when I was 18, I lived at home. But when I was 19, I lived, or you can use past continuous, I was living with friends in a flat. Okay, because I've said when I was 18. So because I've used that time reference, I use I lived. And of course, this is the tricky thing. If you listen to the difference, it's very, very small. I lived, I've lived. I lived, I've lived. I lived, I've lived. So there's a very, very slight difference in pronunciation, and sometimes it's difficult to hear, but you need to try to listen for that little v. I've lived.
And it's very common to use the present perfect first. Oh, I've lived in many countries, and then use the past simple for specific times in the past. I've lived in many countries. I lived in Germany for 2 years. I lived in France when I was 16, etc. One more, though, if you're speaking about the past habits, that's not true now, of course, you can use used to. Just remember that it's infinitive. And in Spanish, if you speak Spanish, it's solía. I used to live in the UK. Lynn also used to live in the UK, but she doesn't now. So you can use that also to say where you used to live or what you used to do or where you used to work in the past, but it's not true now.
Now, I have to correct Rafa because I'm smiling here because he said somebody's been asking where we're from. And Rafa says, Craig is from London. That's right, Craig, isn't it? That's
I
right.
am. Yes, that's right.
I
used to live in London.
Manchester. I'm not from Manchester.
You sound insulted, Lynn.
Well, it's not north enough. I'm much further north in
Scotland.
England. No, not quite. I'm from Sunderland, Rafa, which is near Newcastle. So it's much further north than Manchester, and it's on the other side of the country. But anyway, I'm definitely more northern than Craig.
And there's a similar question from Jose, where we're from. So Lynch just told you, from Sunderland in the north of the UK, and I'm from London.
Okay, all right.
And Eduardo says, we've lived in 2 centuries. We have, yes.
We have indeed.
I'm not saying we're old. No.
I'm not.
We're just,
I don't know about you.
We're just experienced, Eduardo. We're not old.
Exactly. Okay. Right, now we want you guys to join in with us now. So we're going to talk about different ways that you can live in different ways you can live, right, in different places. And we'd like you to tell us what you think the advantages and disadvantages are of these life choices, of choosing these ways to live. Okay, so if you've got anything to say, then start typing in the chat box. And while we're doing this, we'll be talking about all the different ways you can live, because at the moment we've only talked about living at home, haven't we, with parents?
Yeah. But there are many other ways and situations in which you can live. So we'll look at some of these. And again, please write the advantages and disadvantages, in your opinion, of these different ways of living and life choices. So the first one we have, and we've touched on this before, living with your parents.
That's right. So tell us a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of living with your parents. Did you enjoy living with your parents, Craig?
Yes and no. I come from a very close family. Unfortunately, my parents are not with us now. They died a few years ago. But when I was growing up, the family was very, very close. Just myself, my sister, and my parents, really. However, sometimes a very close family can be a bit suffocating. And I flew the nest when I was around 2021 to start traveling. And I think a big reason for that was to breathe, to get away from living at home with my parents. And I mentioned at the beginning of this that I also traveled and came back and traveled and came back. And I think I went away and flew the nest because I wanted to get some independence and live away from the family, partly because they were so close, maybe a bit too close.
Yeah, I think everybody has a similar experience like that, because I have very fond memories of living at home. I was lucky. I had, like you, a nice family, and we were close. And I had a good childhood. I had a good upbringing. So
when you were 18 and you left, did you move away to study? Was that the reason?
Yes, that's right. It wasn't, when I left at 18, it wasn't because I felt that I needed to leave at all. It was just because I studied in a different place. But once I got bitten by the bug of living alone.
Let me write that expression in the chat.
Yeah, once I was bitten by the bug of living alone, well, not really living alone, but living independently, then of course I never ever looked back. And I think that's why I never went back either. So if you get bitten, a bug is like an insect, and sometimes an insect bites you, and then sometimes it's not very nice, but it changes your physique, it changes your blood or whatever. And sometimes we get bitten by the travel bug. That's a nice experience. If you get bitten by the travel bug, it's the first time you go traveling, and then you think, wow, the world is so big. I'd love to travel even more. So that's been bitten by the travel bug. I was bitten by the independence bug. And when I realized how nice it was to live independently, then I was very reluctant to give it up and go back, because of course every time I went back to visit my parents, of course you go back to the nest, and the nest is organized in a very different way, isn't it, than the way that you end up organizing your own life when you're an adult.
People have started to comment on the advantages and disadvantages. Graciela, for example, says there's always someone around, so you don't feel lonely. You're not on your own, which is very true.
That's
Rafa
true.
likes his mum's food. Yeah.
Me too.
And he also says there's support, but is that financial support, Rafa, or emotional support? Because you can get both kinds of support when you're living at home.
Yeah.
Graciela gets on very well with her parents. That's a nice expression, to get on well with your family. Llevarse bien. And Jesse says it's difficult in Mexico to leave the nest. Not have 27. You are 27. So when you are 27 years old, it depends on the economy. And also I think it's probably true in Mexico, but here in Spain, families, I think, are a lot closer. There's an expression to be closely knit, a closely knit family. And it's as, excuse me. Oh dear. As we said before, when you fly the nest and you go and study, you don't often go back home, and you tend to study in other cities in the UK, whereas in Spain, very often you study in the same city. So you continue to live with your family.
Somebody's saying, Craig, maybe you could make sense of this. Jose Ignacio says, hi, Craig and Lynn. I think the downside for Craig was the food. He only knew how to cook shepherd's pie. You can't live eating that every day. You'll have to tell us the background to that, Craig.
That's true. No, Jose Ignacio's made that comment before because he knows the only thing I can cook is shepherd's pie. That's the only thing I know how to cook. Okay. That's not quite true. I can cook a toasted cheese sandwich, which helped me a lot when I was living by myself. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Eating that every day is not a good idea. So that's living with your parents. Let's move on to flat sharing. Lynn, have you ever shared a flat? And can you please write in the chat if you're watching live, what are the advantages and disadvantages of flat sharing?
Yeah, so I shared a few flats in my life. I've shared, present perfect. I've shared a few flats in my life, and in very different kind of situations. So at first, I shared a flat with friends. And that was a wonderful experience. We all got on very well. So we would
How many friends?
Together, 2 friends. There were 3 of us. So we cooked together. We didn't do everything together, but we did have some common things to do together. We also had our own little private lives. But we did cook together, and we cleaned together, and we organized the house together. So it was really nice. It was a very familiar, like living at home. It had all of those advantages that people said, you know, like nice food, company. There was always somebody to talk to, emotional support. So that was a lot of fun. But then I also had the experience of sharing a flat with strangers. So this is when I took a room in a flat, but I didn't know the people before moving in, and they didn't know each other before, really. And that was a very different experience. So when I moved into this house, the people didn't want to cook together. They didn't really do anything together. We didn't become very close friends. So it was a bit like living in I don't know how to say, like a hotel, you know. So you passed people on the corridor and you said good morning or good night, but you didn't have very deep conversations with those people. And
did everybody clean and do their own parts when it came to keeping it clean?
But it wasn't like a group effort. I remember when I was in my first flat share, when we used to clean the house on Saturdays, we would all do it at the same time, you know, and then have a cup of tea afterwards. But in the other flat share, it was like, this week you have to do this, you have to do that. And people did it at different times. And I have to say, I didn't enjoy that flat share as much. I think I felt a bit lonely in that flat share. So I think sharing a flat with people you know and you like, that's much nicer. What about you? Have you had flat shares?
Just let me say what Rafa says, the worst thing in the world. I don't want to remember. Oh dear, that sounds quite negative. Sorry about that, Rafa. And Christine spent 3 years in Valencia and she got on like a house on fire with her flatmates. To get on like a house on fire sounds negative, but it's actually very, very positive. If you get on with someone or with other people like a house on fire, you get on really, really well. And that's easy to remember because you think, oh, a house is burning? That sounds bad if it's on fire, but it's actually really, really positive. So just think the opposite. It's a good thing.
Francisco says, from New Zealand, he says he's sharing a flat with Manuel. I think Manuel's here too. And at the moment, he only has disadvantages. I think you and Manuel are washing your dirty laundry in public.
In public. But don't worry, Francisco, don't worry. We won't tell anybody. It's a secret between us three, you and Lynn and I and the whole of the internet. So don't worry about it. Another thing you could live with a couple. That's another way to live with a partner or live alone. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of that? I've never really lived. Sorry.
I just want to pick up something there that you said because you slipped. You said you can live with a couple. Now, that is a Spanish mistake. Don't say you can live with a couple. If you live with a couple, it means there are two other people that you live with, but they are romantically involved, right?
Yes.
So you've got to be careful with that. You live as a couple, which means you live with another person and you are romantically involved with that person, right? That's to live as a couple. But if you live with a couple, it means three people are living in the house. All right.
Correct.
Sorry. I just wanted to, because Spanish people make that error.
I hadn't noticed. I slipped up and made an error. I've never really lived alone I've never been happy living alone. I've lived alone out of necessity a few times and I've always been very unhappy. I'm not good with my own company. I don't like being alone. Do you enjoy living by yourself?
I've done both. I've lived with a partner as a couple and I've also lived alone. And I liked both. I liked both. But I agree with you. In the long term, I didn't like living alone because I like other people around me. So I think when I did live alone, I lived alone for about 5 years. And after about 3 years, I decided I didn't want to have a flat share because if I have a flat share, I gave up too much control of my nice flat. So I decided to be a landlady and I rented out a room in my flat.
So you had tenants.
So I had one tenant. I had a lodger. We didn't put that word there. I had a lodger. A lodger. That's somebody who you're not sharing everything. They just have a bedroom, and they share the facilities with you. But like they're not equal partnerships. It's not an equal partnership really when you have a lodger. So I had a lodger and that was lovely because it was a bit of company in the evening and sometimes we ate together and it was extra money as well. So it was nice.
We've got some comments coming in. Rafa says living alone is always better. You don't have to give any explanations. Explanations as a couple. Oof. I don't want to remember either.
Ooh.
I think we've touched a nerve with Rafa.
You don't like flat shares. You don't like living with couples. So obviously you are the bachelor, the perfect bachelor. Perfect bachelor is a single man who wants to live alone. He wants to have his area.
Graciela has a nice expression, to shack up with someone. That's a very informal expression, which means to live with someone. Is it romantically? Is it because there's a relationship, a sexual relationship there?
Yes. And it means that you are not married, I think. If you say they're shacking up together, it means they're
it's
going
quite
off
negative,
to live
isn't
together. Yeah, it is really.
Oh, she's shacking up with him and we don't like him. Yeah.
That's right.
Shack up with someone.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Well, Christine says the silver lining of living as a couple, well done, is that you feel supported emotionally. Yeah, I think that's true.
That's true most of the time. Nothing's perfect.
Okay.
Nothing's perfect in this world, unfortunately, but most of the time, Okay, let's move on to living in a hall of residence, which is something I've never done. So do you have any experience, Lynn, of
I've lived everywhere. I tell you, I've lived everywhere.
What is a hall of residence?
So a hall of residence is when you go to university, and usually these are big sort of buildings, and they have rooms where the students can live. And the students share kitchens and bathrooms. Now, in some halls of residence, they even give you your food, right? So they make their meals for you. So basically, it's like a hotel for the university, right? If you like, a hall of residence. But there's different options. You can have it with food or without food. And when I first left home, I lived in a hall of residence for a year, and we did get food from Monday to Friday. So we had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So I didn't have to cook, but I did live in my own room. And at the weekends I had to cook. And I also had to obviously wash my own clothes and clean my own room.
So did you have a roommate, or were you living?
No, I had
yourself?
my individual room, but I was surrounded by other students who had individual rooms.
And you had meals together?
But we had meals together. And I always thought it was a lovely thing, a hall of residence, because there was always parties, of course, lots of parties, lots of gossip, lots of young people living together.
Sounds really wild.
It was. And for me, it was a great way to make the transition from living at home, where my parents did everything for me. I mean, I was very lucky. My parents, my mother, I mean, they did everything for me. They washed, they cooked, they cleaned, but that was kind of like the first step to being a little bit more independent. And then after the first year, I met friends in that hall of residence, and we went to live, and we had a flat together. We did a flat share for the rest of my time. So halls of residence, I have only positive memories of halls of residence. I think it's a great, and as an advantage to what somebody was saying from Mexico, that, you know, it's very difficult to leave home because it's quite expensive to live in a flat on your own. Then these kinds of things, I mean, as far as I know, they only exist for students, but really it's a good way for young people to be able to start living on their own. But they don't offer these kind of things, I don't think, in many countries, not that I know of anyway.
It's a stepping stone to independence, you could say, a stepping stone. Jose Ignacio says he remembers the first time he lived with his ex-girlfriend, and he didn't know the price of things like curtains. Yeah, I remember that too, because when I lived with a flatmate, two guys living together is completely different to when you move in with a couple, a romantic relationship, and then you have to think about buying things for the kitchen and putting up curtains and making the place a home and not just a place to live and work and have parties. And Katia says she loves to live with her husband. As a Latina, I use the gerund after miss, so I miss living near to my mum. Christine says living in a hall of residence implies sticking to strict rules in terms of timetables, for instance. Was it very strict, Lynn, where you were?
Yes, it was. But
Did you have a curfew? Un toque de
oh,
queda?
well, we did actually. You weren't allowed to have visitors in the hall of residence after 10 o'clock at night. And I actually lived in an all-girls hall of residence. So it was a hall of residence exclusively for girls. And we also had a warden. That was a woman who was like a caretaker, and she lived she had a flat next to the entrance of the hall of residence. And she was responsible for making sure that the rules were followed. But the entire year consisted of how can you get access to the hall of residence after midnight, and how can the boys stay in the hall of residence, and how can you break the rules? So we had loads of fun hiding boys in different rooms, and it was fun. Yeah, but there were a lot of rooms. That's true. It sounds, but everybody, when there are rules, people want to break them, I think.
Rafa's asking about toque de queda. It's curfew, which we're experiencing obviously with coronavirus at the moment, Rafa, because it's not the same as lockdown. Curfew is where you have to be at home or everything closes at a particular time. Lockdown is a lot stricter, and lockdown is being used at the moment for the coronavirus situation. And curfew is the translation of toque de queda. And Felipe is from Chile, and he says that on his exchange studies, he shared a flat, he flat shared, but other Chilean friend was in a hall of residence and he slept there. And for Chileans, that's quite normal. For Europeans, not as much. Well, I had a friend who married a nurse, and before they got married, she was in a hall of residence in the hospital, and he used to go inside and sleep in her room illegally because they were boyfriend and girlfriend. So he used to go inside. So yeah, British people do it, but it's not normal. No, it's you have to be very careful. Yeah.
That's right. Okay. Next one.
Next one, my favorite, on the road, out of a suitcase, to be free and live out of a suitcase. That's my favorite thing, and I really, really miss it. Not to have a permanent home, to travel, to live out of a suitcase is an expression. And that's something I did a lot when I was younger. I used to travel a lot, not have a permanent home, work abroad, go back to the UK, move in with my parents, earn some money, travel again, and be on the road, live out of a suitcase. It's a lot of fun.
It is.
But it has disadvantages, though. So
well, I did it for a while, but not for maybe as longer periods as you did. Maybe like for 6 months, I think was the longest I did it for. I did it for smaller periods, 3 months, 2 months, 6 months. And
which countries did you do it in?
Well, for about 4 months was in New Zealand. Somebody was here from New Zealand, and I didn't actually have a suitcase because I was riding around New Zealand for 2 months on a bicycle. So I was living out of a bicycle pack.
Oh.
Yeah. And then like traveling like with a rucksack and staying in backpackers, that kind of traveling I've done before. But I have to say that when I finished those, I really enjoyed them, but I was ready to go back to have a home, to have a place where I could unpack things. Living out of a suitcase all the time, I think, what I missed is actually having my things in a particular place. Sounds very, very pedantic, doesn't it?
Yes.
But there's something that makes me feel calm when I have some possessions. You don't have to have a lot of possessions, but some things and some particular places to put those things. It makes me feel very secure. And when you live in a suitcase, you never have that. You're constantly changing places, and your things are always in different places. And that has, over time, it starts to bother me. So it never bothered me so much because I traveled with very, very few things, just a rucksack or a backpack
on my back, and the things I had with me were really important, and I took care of them. But I
Mhm.
never traveled with a lot of things. I never,
Mhm.
and mainly clothes, because
Mhm.
I didn't really have anything with me apart from clothes.
Mhm.
We've got some more comments coming in from Carmen, who studied in Coventry
Mhm.
in a house. That's a house share, isn't it, Lynn? With 9 more
It is,
students.
or you say they don't tend to say hall of residence for that because there's only 9 students. A hall is really like a big place. There might be 100
And it's usually a
students.
university building, not a separate house.
That's true. But that I would say university accommodation. Yeah.
Yeah.
You'd say you're in university accommodation, and it's a house provided, but they say university accommodation, and the understanding is that it's a flat share, I think.
Felipe's asking if out of a suitcase needs to be written with hyphens. If you're using it as a noun, then yes, or an adjective, you would say it was an out of a suitcase experience, for example. So you're describing the experience with kind of an adjective. So then you'd use a hyphen between each word. And Graciela says, on the road, impossible in Argentina. Yeah, Argentina are having a difficult time at the moment. Rafa's teaching us French. Un word fou is curfew. Well done for knowing that.
Oh.
And it's on Christine's bucket list. A bucket list is a list of things you want to do before you die. And living on the road. It's on my bucket list too, Christine. I hope I can, when we can travel again, I hope I can live out of a suitcase for a few months and go traveling for a while.
Me too.
I miss it.
That's why I'm living in Valencia. Because it's not permanent.
We've got a few minutes left. Shall we go to some questions just to finish? So we've got, what have we got here? Oh, this is a nice one. What makes a house a home or a flat a home? What's the difference between home and the physical place, like the flat or the house or the apartment?
I did my homework. I have a clear answer for this. I thought about it.
Well, go
before
ahead.
the class. So what makes a house a home for me? So I've got 3 things. It's people. So the people I live with is home for me. It's not particularly the place, right? The other thing that makes a place a home for me is, and this sounds very materialistic, but it's things. I have certain objects that make my place a home. And it could be a photograph of my parents, for example, or it could be a book that I've had all my life. Yeah. Or I have certain objects that make my home.
But those objects must spark some kind of emotional connection for you.
Yes,
it can't
they
be just
do.
any object.
No,
Something
they do.
emotional.
It's not any. It's got an emotional. But
feeling.
I do realize that what makes me feel at home is having those objects close. Yeah, having those objects. So it is objects. And the third thing is what I mentioned before. It's organization. You know, it's important to me to have the objects in a certain position.
You can have a messy home, can't you?
Yes, you can. But you know, I like. I feel at home when things are in the right place.
A place for everything and everything in its place.
Exactly. But it's not the city, and it's not the building, and it's not the flat. That's not my home. My home is the people, the organization, and the things. Mm-hmm.
I agree up to a point. The organization thing I'm not convinced about. I mean, I think I'm fairly organized, but I wouldn't put that in a description of a home, because you can have an organized office. I would also add like a feeling of being comfortable. For example, if I travel for a long time, I miss my bathroom, I miss my shower, I miss my bed, my comfortable chair, because it makes me feel comfortable. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel at home. I miss my toilet. I miss things that I'm used to, that I've become accustomed to over time. So for me, that's a big part of it.
But it's like a toothbrush, right? I always like to have my toothbrush in a cup, right? In the bathroom.
Well, yeah.
And for example, if I don't have a cup for my toothbrush, I don't feel at home. So if I go to a hotel, for example, and the hotel, I can feel at home. I can feel at home in a hotel. I can feel at home in your house if you invite me to stay. But I need a cup for my toothbrush. That makes me feel really at home, you know.
Christine says home is where your heart is. That's true as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And Graciela says the smell, yes, how things are arranged, which is what Lynn's saying. And yeah, of course, the people. Absolutely.
Eduardo says something hilarious. For Eduardo's up. Home is the place where you can go to the bathroom with absolute confidence.
And leave the door open.
Perfect, Eduardo. Perfect.
Not
I would
close
agree.
the door. That's where you're at home. Francisco says your home's where you have your best memories. In my case, Queenstown, New Zealand.
Oh, that's a lovely place, Francisco. I've been to Queenstown. It's beautiful. Well done. Hello in Queenstown.
Okay, I think we're getting close to saying goodbye, unfortunately. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you very much for spending time with us. And shall we go quickly through the vocabulary we covered at the beginning just to review?
Yeah.
So we spoke about flying the nest when you leave home. If you have children, for example, when your children go off to study and they go to work and they leave your house, then if all your children go, you are an empty nester because you have no birds or children in your nest. They have flown the nest and they've left home, so they don't live at home anymore.
Mm-hmm. And then we have flatmate. That's the person who lives in the same flat as you. You share the flat together. Roommate, if you share a room, if you sleep together in the same room. Landlord and landlady are the people who rent the housing to you. And if you rent your flat, you are a tenant. Mm-hmm.
If you don't have much money, you're living from hand to mouth, which means you get your check, your paycheck, and you live from paycheck to paycheck or from month to month. So you're paying your rent, you're paying your food, but only just living from hand to mouth. And if you have no home, you're homeless.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to, if your children have flown the nest and you're living in a very big house and you decide you're getting older and you would rather live somewhere smaller, then you decide to go to a smaller place to live, and we use the verb to downsize. So you're downsizing and you're moving to a flat. Mm-hmm. You're selling your house.
The verb tenses we discussed use the present continuous when it's a temporary situation, and present simple when it's permanent. So we both live in Valencia, Spain, but if we take a job in Poland for 6 months, we can say, well, we're living in Poland, but after we're going back to Spain.
Mm-hmm. And we use the present perfect if you're going to talk about all the places you've lived in your life up to now. So if you're talking about just generally with no time references, just your experience of where you've lived, you'll use the present perfect, I've lived. And
past simple when it's a time in the past that's not connected to now, very often with a time reference. So I lived in Paris 2 years ago, or I lived, when I studied, I lived in Moscow, for example.
Mm-hmm. And used to live is for where places in the past that you no longer live now. You can say, I used to live, just the same. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you for watching. I'll be back again next week with Monica, and hopefully Lynn will be back in 2 weeks. We'll have to speak if we're doing anything for Easter, but probably not, considering the situation at the moment. Thanks again for watching. Oh, before we go, just to remind you where you can find us, if you don't know, Lynn, where can people find you?
Okay, so they can find me at putitlikethis.com, and you can find out all information about the kind of services I offer if you're interested in learning English for specific objectives. Okay.
And for me, Inglés Podcast is the weekly podcast that I do with my co-host Reza that gets released on a Sunday. You can find past episodes at inglespodcast.com. And there's lots of material, free courses and free other stuff to improve your English over at mansioningles.com. So have a look over there for more information. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you soon. Take care and stay safe.
Happy Easter, because I won't see you next week, but the week after. So happy Easter, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.